Let's say you're at the doctor, and the doctor hands you a prescription for high cholesterol. The prescription is for Lipitor, a tablet medication that contains a cholesterol-lowering medicine, a statin called atorvastatin. It's an especially popular medication right now. More than 200 million people around the world take Lipitor or a similar generic for their heart health. For scale, that's equivalent to the entire population of Brazil. And all of those patients have made the drug maker, Pfizer, incredibly rich. Since it went on sale in early 1997, Pfizer's Lipitor has collected $164.43 billion with a B through 2018. That's just below the size of Hungary's entire economy. The initial cost of the drug was more than $5 a tablet, but that actually fell by 95% to 31 cents a tablet when the drug went generic after its patent expired in 2011. Though sales have declined, even today, Lipitor is still a force to be reckoned with. But let's say your doctor's appointment is happening in the United Kingdom, for example, and you're not buying generic. There, your 1 month supply of 40 milligram Lipitor prescription will cost you, on average, $25. If you're seeing a doctor in Germany without insurance, the drug runs around $16 for a 1 month supply. But if you're seeing a doctor in the United States, your Lipitor prescription will, on average, run you $405 before insurance. How does this happen? How does the exact same drug cost so much more in the United States than it does in other countries in Europe? Well, let's take a look. Now, Lipitor is the exact same drug, whether it's sold in the United States or Switzerland or Germany or the United Kingdom. What is different, however, is the regulatory system that we've set up around the pharmaceutical industry in the United States. The United States is exceptional in that it does not regulate or negotiate the prices of new prescription drugs when they come onto the market. And that's vastly different than here in Europe. Countries like Germany, the UK, or France, for example, will task a government agency to meet with pharmaceutical companies and haggle over an appropriate price. These agencies will typically make decisions about whether the new drugs represent any improvement over the old drugs, whether they're even worth bringing onto the market in the first place. And they'll pore over reams of evidence about the drug's risks and benefits. But in the United States, the drug makers are allowed to set their own price for the drug on the open market. And as long as that drug is proven to be safe, it's allowed to enter the market. And the problems that causes are easy to see, from the high copays at the drugstore to people who, quite frankly, can't even afford life-saving medications. But let's back up a bit, because I really want to explain how this plays out specifically with a little bit of a thought experiment to do together. Let's say you are a pharmaceutical executive and you've discovered a new anti-cancer drug, and you want to sell it in the European Union and other countries in the EEA, which is Liechtenstein, Iceland, and Norway. You'll first have to submit an application to the European Medicines Agency, where you'll attempt to prove that your drug is more effective, safer, and well tolerated than whatever else is on the market right now. This is determined in studies, ranging all the way from lab tests with a test tube to full-scale clinical trials. Now, assuming the drug passes the assessment of safety, efficacy, and tolerability, the drug will then go into a review by the individual EU and EEA member states for consideration to enter into their respective markets. In Germany, the largest EU market, this task belongs to the Federal Joint Committee, a non-state self-governance body that includes payer, healthcare professional, and patient representatives. Next, the Institute for Quality and Efficiency in Healthcare compares new therapies with the standard of care, not a placebo, for any given indication and makes a determination of coverage. The Institute is going to take a holistic view of the evidence, including studies not judged by the FDA, to be pivotal. And as a result, this committee can consider a variety of outcomes, including morbidity, mortality, quality of life, patient experience, for example, before making their final decision. Now, if this review does not show that your drug has any added benefit, don't worry, your drug can actually still remain on the German market. But there's a catch. Your drug isn't allowed to cost any more than the current standard of treatment. But on the other hand, if your drug proves to be the miracle that you claim it to be, the next step is actually to enter into negotiations with the statutory health insurance companies, where you'll arrive at a fair price that not only allows you to get your return on investment, but also helps to shelter the insurance companies from price gouging and really, by proxy, the patients themselves who pay their premiums. To address national price variations, European states incorporated external reference pricing into their price controls in the 1990s. Essentially what this means is that they accept that manufacturers are going to grant discounts to other countries for purchasing higher volumes and other factors, but they are able to look at what this drug is costing in other countries to help reference what they should also appropriately cost in their own, just to assume fairness between one country to another. But again, this is very much not how drugs work in the United States. The manufacturer is allowed to basically set whatever price they feel like setting. And the FDA doesn't have any say in this whatsoever. Again, simply as long as that drug is proven to be safe and effective, they're allowed to enter the market. No questions asked in regards to price. And that actually makes me think that we should probably take a more closer look at how US drug prices kind of came to be in the first place. On the flip side of things, the US has no government panel that negotiates drug prices, and there are thousands of health insurance plans across the country. Each has to negotiate its own price with drug makers separately. Because Americans are fragmented across all of these different health insurers, plans have much less bargaining power to demand lower prices. In other words, Europe is buying in bulk, like you would if you shopped at Costco, whereas Americans are buying teeny tiny little bottles from their individual pharmacy. And yeah, you can probably guess who's gonna end up paying more. There is, of course, one major exception to the fragmented American system: Medicare, which covers about 55 million Americans over the age of 65. However, up until literally this month, federal law actually prohibited Medicare from negotiating drug prices with the drug makers themselves. But interestingly, again, as of this month, that's changing. All in thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act of 2022, signed into law by President Biden in August of 2022. The act includes several provisions to lower prescription drug costs for people with Medicare and reduce drug spending by the federal government. But we might not want to celebrate too quickly here. On August 29th, the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services announced the first 10 drugs covered under Medicare Part D that were selected for this new negotiation. The negotiations with participating drug companies, though, aren't actually going to occur until late 2023, 2024, and any of those negotiated prices won't actually become effective until the beginning of 2026. And drugs covered under Medicare Part B won't actually be negotiated and available at a lower price until 2028. And all of those low prices aren't even gonna happen in the first place unless all of the 8 current lawsuits filed by Big Pharma happen to fail.
Carl, good morning. Merck is suing the federal government over the Medicare price negotiation provision of the Inflation Reduction Act, calling it, quote, political kabuki theater.
Yeah, that's right. Drug makers, including Pharma, the drug industry's major lobbying group, Bristol Myers Squibb, Janssen Pharmaceuticals, Merck, AstraZeneca, and Boehringer Ingelheim, the German pharma company, for example, are all companies that are currently throwing the kitchen sink to halt Medicare price negotiations. And listen, you don't have to look too deeply into it to understand why all of these pharmaceutical companies don't exactly want Americans to be able to collectively bargain for their prescription drug prices. Americans spend $858 per person on average on prescription drugs. That's about twice as much as Australians and 3 times more than the Dutch. But what's interesting is that there isn't actually much evidence that Americans use an inordinately high amount of prescription drugs. It's just that when they buy prescription medications, they just happen to pay more for the very same drug. I mean, take a look at these price differences for the arthritis and psoriasis drug Humira, or the cancer drug Avastin, or Harvoni, a drug that cures hepatitis C. Honestly, pick any brand name drug and you'll almost certainly find that the price in the US is significantly higher than in other countries. Now, I can already anticipate that there are probably going to be some cries from the Americans in my audience who are probably already feverishly typing that what's happening in Europe is stifling the free market and borderlining on socialism. But gosh, honestly, there is a lot wrong with that statement. Countries like Australia, France, Germany, and Great Britain do not regulate the price of other things that consumers buy, like computers or clothing. But they and dozens of other countries around the globe have all made the decision to regulate the price of drugs, to ensure that medical treatment remains affordable to all citizens, regardless of their income. That's because medications are not iPhones. Medications are something that some people quite literally would die if they didn't have access to them. You can't even begin to treat them on the same playing field. Now, don't get me wrong, this decision comes with policy trade-offs, no doubt. Sometimes countries like Great Britain, for example, will refuse to cover drugs that they just don't think are worth the price. In order for regulatory agencies to have to leverage in negotiations with drug makers, they sometimes have to be able to say no to the drugs that they don't think are up to snuff. And yeah, this will mean that certain drugs that sell in the US aren't available in other countries. And yeah, there are often public outcries when these agencies refuse to approve a given drug. But at the same time, just because there are more drugs on the American market doesn't mean that people actually have access to them. Sometimes these drugs are so expensive that even the people who need them, quite frankly, can't afford them. And if you can't afford them, then they might as well not even be in the market in the first place. It also doesn't mean that Americans necessarily get better treatment. Other countries' regulatory agencies usually reject drugs that they just don't think provide enough benefit to justify the price that drug makers want to charge. In the United States, however, those drugs do come onto the market, which means they get expensive drugs that offer sometimes little additional benefit, but might just happen to be especially good at marketing. Remember, pharmaceutical companies marketing flashing commercials during your evening news cycle is a uniquely American phenomenon.
Talk to your doctor about your risk and about Lipitor.
In most countries, the decision to take a drug or not should be made by the physician, not because a consumer is influenced to ask for it. But in the States, they do it because it pays off, literally. This happened in 2012 with a drug called Zoltrap, which treats colorectal cancer. The drug costs about $11,000 per month, twice as much as its competitors, while in the eyes of doctors, offering no additional benefit. Yet, many Americans saw the commercial, talked to their doctor, and ended up taking that medication instead. Now, I do want to play devil's advocate here just for a little bit because I actually do think that there's a legitimate argument to be had about one of the consequences of lower drug prices, and that's the toll that that takes potentially on innovation of new research and new drugs as a result. Lowering drug profits would probably make pharmaceuticals a less desirable industry for investors. And less investment in drugs would mean less research towards new and innovative cures. Think about it like a venture capitalist who might be deciding whether to invest $10 million in a new social media app or a cure for pancreatic cancer. As you decrease the potential profits they could make from pancreatic cures, they're going to shift more of their investment over to apps, or maybe just keep the money in the bank and earn the money they make there. But this doesn't have to be a hypothetical. We've seen this happen in real life too. When the government mandates the coverage of a new type of drug, there are more clinical trials to develop that particular treatment. Consider, for example, the work of MIT economist Amy Finkelstein. She looked at what happened after Medicare began covering the flu vaccine for its millions of enrollees. And she found that with the usage of the flu vaccine guaranteed to increase, there was a 2.5-fold increase in clinical trials for new flu vaccines. But I would actually personally stop short of saying that the US exponentially higher drug prices somehow subsidizes the rest of the world. It's a common talking point that's parroted by Big Pharma in order to convince you that the higher prices you're paying are somehow some altruistic good that you're providing for the rest of us here in Europe, for example. Because quite frankly, that's really not true all of the time. Earlier, I talked about the approval process for new medications in Germany, but there's actually a caveat to their collective bargaining system. The analysis by that governing body of cost versus reward does not apply to orphan drugs. Orphan drugs are medications for rare diseases with expected revenues below 50 million euros per year. And these actually account for almost half of all of the new approvals, and they often still have high prices. I've actually spoken before in a different YouTube video that I take one of these orphan drugs. It's called Dupixent, and I take it for this serious sinus issue that I've been dealing with for like 15 years now. This injection that I have to take every 2 weeks has an average monthly retail price of almost $5,000. And my German insurer pays it because it's an orphan drug that treats my rare disease, and I've exhausted all other options for treatment. So yeah, the manufacturer of my drug still gets its return on investment even in countries with public health insurance schemes like here in Germany. But this kind of example also applies to other drugs that are marketed to the masses as well. All you need to do is just take a look at Pfizer's benchmark vaccine during the global pandemic. Vice President Mike Pence was among other Trump administration officials saying that support from the government's Operation Warp Speed program helped to accelerate the development of the vaccine, which was found to be more than 90% effective in preventing symptomatic infections in an interim analysis. But the truth? Pfizer didn't receive any funding from Operation Warp Speed for the development, clinical trials, or manufacturing of the vaccine. Rather, its partner, BioNTech SE, received the money for this vaccine from the German government. And so yes, at the end of the day, of course this means that America's sky-high prices for drugs generate sky-high profits for pharmaceutical companies. But it also means that there are a lot of drugs currently on the American market that people just quite frankly can't afford. And while I certainly will not attempt to speak for everyone, I would still wager that there's a sizable chunk of the American population that would probably trade a little bit of that innovation in order to get better access and better prices. Especially since 1 in 4 Americans report trouble paying for their prescription drugs in the first place. So, all of this kind of got me thinking, hypothetically speaking, what if America was to start to regulate their drug prices like they do here in Europe? What would happen? Well, the obvious first answer is that they'd spend less on prescription drugs. If the United States set up an agency that negotiated drug prices on behalf of the country's 332 million residents, it would likely be able to demand discounts similar to those in European countries. And this would mean that health insurance premiums, quite frankly, probably wouldn't go up nearly as quickly. In some cases, they might even go down. But yeah, of course, that's gonna come with some trade-offs. Americans would likely have to give up some of the choice of drugs that their insurance plans cover. If a national board made decisions about what prices were appropriate for drugs, it would need to have the ability to reject the drugs that didn't make the cut. But we do already know what this would kind of look like in the US. The Veterans Health Administration, for example, already negotiates drug prices, and it gets drugs that are usually 40% cheaper than what Medicare pays. But yeah, it covers fewer products. As a result, many older patients who get their health insurance from the VA also sign up for Medicare drug plans to cover medicines that the VA won't. But I think the biggest issue that government oversight over drug prices would solve isn't even necessarily about collective bargaining. It's just simply ensuring that the price that the drug maker is asking is actually justifiable in the first place. Currently, manufacturers can dilute the effects of discounts they give to insurance companies who negotiate with them by simply just raising the list prices in the first place. United States insurers could actually save money and provide incentives to create innovative medicines if they assessed the value of the new drugs and allowed prices higher than competitor drugs only when the new drug has an added therapeutic value. But there's also more that could be done. European countries like France and Germany purchase medications using 5-year contracts that prohibit price increases. In contrast, the US pharmaceutical firms can actually raise prices at will, and they often do. Just take a look at the poster child for pharmaceutical price gouging: insulin. When inventor Frederick Banting discovered insulin in 1923, he actually refused to put his name on the patent. He felt that it was unethical for a doctor to profit from a discovery that would save lives. And Banting's co-inventors sold the insulin patent to the University of Toronto for a mere $1. They wanted everyone who needed their medication to be able to afford it. But today, I think Banting and his colleagues would be rolling over in their graves if they knew that in the United States, the drug that they worked so hard to make available to the masses, which by the way, 8.4 million Americans depend on for survival, has actually quintupled over 2 decades to more than $300 per vial. Now, in March of this year, Eli Lilly and Company, which sells about a third of the insulin in the US, made headlines for its altruistic offer to lower its price, capping the out-of-pocket costs for its most popular insulin at just $35, and slashing the list price of its authorized generic, Lispro, to $25 a vial. David Ricks, Lilly CEO, during interviews in March, called for other manufacturers to join in his company in, quote, taking away the affordability challenges, end quote, of diabetes. Now, while this certainly promotes a good guy image, they also did it because it makes financial sense for them. Yeah, it's probably gonna save them money. A federal rule taking effect next year actually penalizes companies that charge Medicaid high prices, especially for older branded drugs. So lowering the list price of insulin would actually allow them to pay significantly less in rebates to government Medicaid programs that buy the drug in the first place. Now, every policy decision comes with trade-offs. It's true for everything, including prescription drug prices. If we were able to regulate them in the US, it would probably mean, yeah, that for sure, Americans would have better access to drugs simply because they were more affordable, so people probably wouldn't put off buying medication that they need on a regular basis. But the trade-off with that also is that if Americans are spending less on drugs, there's less money to be funneled into things like research and development for new cures. And thinking about things like this, there's really not one easy answer. Do we want to lower the price of drugs like the hepatitis C cure that hit the market for $84,000, knowing that price controls might lead to less investment in pursuing other cures in the future? For example, if you have Hep C today, you probably want to have that drug for a cheaper price. But if you have pancreatic cancer today, you probably want to do everything you can to get more money put into research and development pipeline to cure your disease. Yeah, this isn't a comfortable question to think about. You know, how much innovation are we willing as a community to pay for? And where do we draw the line on cost benefit when it comes to cures and innovation in the first place? But it's a question I find really fascinating, and I would love to hear from you down below in the comments on what your thoughts are on all of this. As always, I love hearing from you. And if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you next Sunday.